Welcome to the DaVinci Hour podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Maxwell Cooper, and in this podcast series, I interview physicians, medical innovators, and entrepreneurs making an impact on healthcare. This podcast is produced by DaVinci Academy, a multimedia medical education company that provides podcasts, video courses, and digital textbooks. You can see more on our website, www.dviacademy.com, and our YouTube channel, youtube.com/c/DaVinci Academy Med. This podcast is sponsored by Doc2Doc, the personal lending platform designed for doctors by doctors. Do you have some big expenses in the near future? Maybe you're moving, applying to residency or fellowship, fixing up your car or home, or starting a new practice. Doc2Doc believes that traditional lenders overestimate the risk of lending money to doctors, residents, and medical students, focusing too much on the challenges of their financial past and giving them insufficient credit for the promise of their financial future. Check out Doc2Doc's personal loan options at doc2doclending.com/DaVinci. Hey everybody, welcome back to the DaVinci Hour podcast. I'm joined this week by Shan Padda, who is the founder and CEO of Harvard MedTech. So Shane, welcome to the podcast. Really happy to have you here and talk about what you're working on.
Hi, Maxwell. Thank you very much for having me on, and I really appreciate it and look forward to sharing our story.
Excellent. So maybe give a little bit of background on yourself. I know you're a serial entrepreneur. This isn't your first rodeo, so maybe give us a little bit of background on yourself and how you got involved in Harvard MedTech.
Yeah, so depending on how far back we want to go, I studied biology, neurobiology, actually in college at Harvard. And I started my first company right out of school. So it was serendipitous. It wasn't a planned exercise. So I've been a serial entrepreneur my entire career. And in that journey, I've been lucky enough to have started, scaled, and then sold 5 businesses. 3 of them were in healthcare, 2 were not. One was a consumer products company, one was a software company. And then in the healthcare space, 2 of them were medical devices, and one was a tech-enabled services model. And healthcare is really where I've focused the last 25 years of my career. It's the space I love the most. It's a big industry. It's not optimally structured in a lot of ways. So that creates opportunities for entrepreneurs. And it's also a very meaningful way to make a difference because you have the privilege of helping people with their health. What could be more important to someone? So it's a space that I really enjoy.
Sure, absolutely. No, I think that's a critical point. It's a ripe for innovation, for opportunities to, that's what entrepreneurs do at the end of the day is I don't have to tell you, is solve problems. And I think there's, unfortunately, there's a lot of problems in healthcare, but like you said, that creates a lot of opportunities as well. So I'm curious for Harvard MedTech, what was the inspiration to start that company? What kind of clinical need did you and your team see, and what's the technology you guys are trying to develop to solve that?
Great question. I think that in order to understand my motivation, let me just share that over the course of my career, as I've progressed, I've had the luxury of being able to choose more than I did early in my career in terms of what companies I want to get involved with. And at this point in my career, I tend to be very mission driven. I'm a capitalist, but I want to work on ideas that are going to be meaningful and they'll have a positive impact on the populations or the markets that we serve. I had sold my last company and I thought I was retired. And I was in that state for about a year. And it was the second time I tried to retire, and I'm just not wired that way. And pretty soon I was climbing the walls. I was trying to figure out, well, what's the next big challenge in healthcare that we can try to help address? And the obvious tall pole in the tent was the whole opioid epidemic. Different entrepreneurs operate in different ways. Some entrepreneurs come up with abstract thoughts or ideas and then assume that the market will come. And Steve Jobs was a master at that. Other entrepreneurs like myself tend to be a little bit more linear in that I need to see a problem and then try to find a solution to it. And so in this case, the problem was the opioid epidemic in the country. And as I looked at, why do we have an opiate epidemic? What caused it? What's going on? It really led me down a path of where I realized that our current strategy for managing pain, especially chronic pain, was not really the optimal approach. And opioids were a symptom of a misguided approach to treat chronic pain. Turns out that opioids are really a masking agent, just like alcohol or medical marijuana. And I'm not being judgmental, but my point is that they numb a person so they don't feel the pain, but they don't do anything to address the underlying issues that are causing the chronic pain. And it was on that journey to solve the opioid epidemic problem that I came up with the idea for Harvard MedTech and put together the company and took it to market.
I think that's so critical. What you hit on with the chronic pain patients is that, especially like with the opioid epidemic, it numbs the pain, but it does, it's temporary. It doesn't get at the heart of the problem. And in fact, in my field of interventional radiology, we are, it's a evolving field where we do a lot of interventional pain procedures now, and where we try to really get at the heart of those pain generators. But even still with that, as I'm sure we'll get into there, it's much more complicated than just, targeting the nerve that may be causing the pain. The brain's involved. Pain is a very complex, as you know, and we'll talk about, is a very complex pathology, pathology that has to be dealt with in multiple different areas. So I'm curious, maybe give us a little bit like a 30,000 overview of the technology, like what it exactly what it is, how it works and all that. And then we'll kind of get into more of the details of how you guys are working on it.
A great question, Maxwell. In terms of understanding how the program works and why we put it together the way we did, I think it's helpful to share what I view as the landscape of chronic pain. There's a certain percentage of the patients, let's say about 25%, that you can identify a structural underlying issue that you can address and fix, whether it's by addressing a nerve that's not functioning optimally, or whether there's other issues like osteoarthritis where there's degeneration going on. So there's actually physical things that you can identify that are causing chronic pain. However, the vast majority of chronic pain patients, the other 75%, actually have chronic pain that has nothing to do with anything physical that's going on in terms of injuries or challenging structural issues within their body. Those patients suffer from either one of two challenges. The biggest bucket is, and to your point, pain is a very complex process, and there's many different parts of the brain that are involved. It's not a linear thing that, okay, there's one thing, if we can turn it off, then all of a sudden the patient's not having pain. And without getting into a deep dive into brain morphology and how the different parts of the brain work together and how they impact pain, let's just kind of look at it at a higher level and say that about half of the chronic pain patients suffer from what I call emotional pain. That is where some sort of a traumatic incident has happened that was so jarring that the patient that got burned into or stored into the emotional center of the brain. Once that's happened, it takes on a life of its own. And even after the initial injury, whatever it may have been, has long gone or healed, the patient continues to feel pain. The poster child of that is phantom limb syndrome, for example, where somebody, let's say I had an amputation, lost my right arm, I'm still feeling pain in that arm. We know that can't possibly be. And that's the perfect example of emotional pain. And the other big bucket, which is about 25 to 30% of the patients, are deemed too sensitive to pain or similar labels. And really what's going on with those patients is their thalamus, which is a part of the brain that sits on top of the spinal cord, that monitors and processes signals coming from other parts of the body and then passes it off to different parts of the brain, depending on what the signals are and what needs to happen. For those patients, the thalamus is not functioning optimally. It's almost like that thalamus is hyperactive, if you will, where it's measuring for pain signals much, much more frequently. And normally pain signals that would have been a low intensity pain signal that it would have not triggered a thought for the patient. Now the patient thinks, okay, this is it. I actually have pain. And so between those two issues, that's really about 75% of the people who have chronic pain. In order to help them, we had to come up with a solution that would help both the thalamus issue in terms of how do you retrain that part of the brain so that it can operate more optimally, along with a solution for emotional pain, where really what you need are behavioral health interventions that will help the patient process and then get beyond whatever incident is causing that. And oftentimes the term around that is exposure therapy, but as a simplistic term. So as I was looking at it, the VR is an amazingly powerful tool because it is so immersive. So when a patient puts on a VR headset with the right kind of programming, they're so absorbed into what is happening in the VR headset that the distraction principle kicks in. When that happens, automatically that patient's brain will deprioritize secondary signals such as hunger, need to go to the bathroom, and pain. That patient, in effect, is more pain resilient, if you will. And what we found is that VR is an amazingly powerful analgesic because of the distraction effect. It gives about 50% analgesic benefit, which is the same as you would get by taking an opioid, except that it happens within 4 or 5 minutes of putting on the headset, as opposed to having to wait for 45 minutes or longer for the opioid to kick in. So it's just as powerful from a pain relief perspective as an opioid or a narcotic would be, and yet you don't have any of the addiction issues. What's also interesting is that even after the patient takes off the headset, because we have, through that experience, put that patient into a hyper-focused state in order to achieve that distraction effect, it takes a certain period of time for them to return back to normalcy. That tends to be about an hour, plus or minus half an hour. So the patient feels that 50% pain relief while they have the VR headset on, as well as for an hour or longer after they take it off. What's even more fascinating is that if you repeatedly expose that patient to that VR therapy for 90 days, another concept in neurobiology, neuroplasticity, kicks in, where the patient's brain says, okay, I'm constantly being exposed to this. This is something that I want to be able to recreate, or give Maxwell the ability to recreate when he wants to, because he must want to have this capability because it's constantly happening. And what happens is that after roughly about 90 days, that patient is able to get to that same distracted state where they are deprioritizing secondary signals without the need of a VR headset. They no longer need the tool because they've mastered that ability. Sort of a good analogy is meditation. It takes a long time to become really good at meditation, but once you do, you then have the ability to focus or be in the moment and ignore secondary distractions. So VR seemed like a great way for solving the problem for the patients. In effect, long-term, what we're really doing is making patients more pain resilient so that they can ignore the signals or tolerate the signals without the need to take a narcotic and without impairing their ability to have a normal life. For the other parts of the population, the 50% are suffering from emotional pain, they needed to have behavioral health interventions to process whatever happened and then get beyond that. What's interesting, though, is that a lot of people put behavioral health into a one-size-fits-all box. It's not, just like physical medicine is not. If you have cancer, you should go see an oncologist. If you have issues with your eyes, you should go see an ophthalmologist. And likewise, there's 7 different major therapy styles in behavioral health. CBT is one everyone knows and talks about. If a patient is already opioid dependent, ACT, for example, is a more effective therapy. Mindfulness, motivational interviewing, counter conditioning. So depending on the patient, one of the therapies or a combination of the therapies is going to be more effective for them and what issues they're facing. So we decided, okay, how do we combine the two? And we put together a program. It's a 90-day program. So the way it works is a patient goes to their doctor and says that I'm in pain, something has happened. And generally that would be an orthopedic surgeon or interventional pain specialist. And the physician would tell them that, okay, to help you manage your pain, you have there's two choices. One is the usual care of opioids and nerve blocks and that sort of thing. Or I have a digital health solution for you, Harvard MedTech's program. If the patient picks our program, the doctor writes a script. Within 48 hours, we FedEx our headset to the patient's home, wherever they are in the country. We have an onboarding call for that patient. And on that onboarding call, we do a number of things. We explain the program to them. We get them excited about the program. We teach them how to use the VR headset, and that's really important. The VR headset has about 11 hours of programming, 93 different segments or experiences. And depending on what the patient's needs are, how the sequencing and how they use those different experiences is materially important. And the other thing we do is at that time we build a phenotype for that patient. What's the patient's biopsychosocial construct? What issues are impairing that patient? What type of a behavioral health phenotype do they have? So what therapy style are they going to respond to better? So after we've done all those things, we'll assign one of our master's level behavioral health clinicians. The patient then starts the program. They use a VR headset every day for the 90 days. In addition to that, at least once a week, they have an hour-long call with that clinician, where we're monitoring the patient's progress, as well as we're interacting with the patient and helping them process, you can call it a behavioral health intervention or a therapeutic interaction, where we're helping the patient with all their behavioral health issues. And that happens over 90 days. And then after that, the patient graduates and is in a better place.
That's really cool. I think a lot of things. I mean, one is the whole VR. I think VR is almost a technology in some ways that was a little bit ahead of its time. And I think it was kind of like, we have this cool tool, but how do we use it? And I think, you found an excellent way to use this. It just, it's almost like a natural fit, to help with using visual inputs to help, reprogram and treat people with really complex, mental health and chronic pain and things like that. So I think it just makes so much sense. And I think it's really cool. I'm curious, in the end user stage, like how would this be something that a physician would, prescribe to their patient? And then, it sounds like you've built in systems for them to follow with that patient, which I think is critical, like you said. So yeah. I guess I'm curious. And then on top of that, the reimbursement standpoint, do you see insurance companies covering this as part of that? Or I guess where have you thought about that as well?
Yes. So we're actually beyond that, Maxwell. We are generating revenue. We have been growing at about 200% a year, 300% a year. Our service is covered by insurance, so the insurance company who is the one who pays for it. We have a number of partners that we work with. Obviously, the patient that we serve, the physician who prescribes the product. It does require a prescription from the physician in order for the insurance company to cover the cost. But then we also obviously work with the insurance company. And one of the big concepts that I've always believed in is continuity of care and care coordination. And one of the big problems in our healthcare system is oftentimes when a patient is seeing a number of different healthcare providers, there's a lack of communication between the providers, so that there's no sort of quarterback who understands everything that's happening to their patients. So in order to help ameliorate that, the weekly behavioral health sessions that the patient engages in, those notes, clinical notes, are sent to the prescribing physician, so they know everything that's happening with their patient week after week. We also send the notes to the adjuster from the insurance company and the nurse case manager who's working on behalf of the insurance company to help the patient get better. So it's a way to make sure that everyone is involved and everyone is collaborating to help that patient get better quickly.
That's awesome. That's just amazing. I'm curious, what regulatory pathway did you guys have to go down for this? And I guess what were some of the hurdles you had to overcome with that?
It's a medical device. And so we had to go through the FDA process, which we successfully did. Although that's usually a really challenging part of the process of bringing a new product to market. Just having done this before, like I mentioned, this is my third rodeo as far as medical device companies go. So not that I'm any smarter than anyone else, but if you do the same thing 3 times, you tend to learn how to do it more effectively. And so we went through we did go through the FDA process. The harder struggle actually was around getting insurance reimbursement. The regulatory piece was there. In healthcare, if you're going to bring a product to market, there's 3 things you have to be able to affirmatively answer. Number 1, is the patient going to get better? So you have to have outcomes. Number 2, physicians have to be willing to prescribe it. They're the gatekeepers. If physicians don't believe in something, and you may have the greatest thing since sliced bread in your mind, the patients are never going to receive it. You will never achieve market adoption. And then the third piece is getting insurance companies to pay for it. I mean, 95% of healthcare is still covered through insurance. Self-pay is a relatively small part of the market. And insurance companies are very challenging. And you will always hear horror stories from entrepreneurs in terms of trying to get approval and all those things. We had approval the first month we were in the market. And normally it takes 5 to 7 years. And part of that is, I think, the value proposition that we were bringing, the market to product fit, as well as hopefully just having learned how to articulate the value proposition to an insurance company. You have to be able to show plausibility around how you're going to help them achieve their goals. And one of their goals is cost containment. So you have to be able to show them that this is going to lead to better outcomes for the patient, which will lead to lower costs for them.
That's amazing. I hear from entrepreneurs, that's always a struggle is one, getting obviously the approval, but then getting it paid for is always such can be an arduous process. I'm curious you hit on something really important where I think where some people may miss initially is that if the physicians don't like it, they're not going to use it. I can just, I see that, from different physicians I work with, where if there's a product they don't like, they just don't use it. And so I'm curious what role have, physician advisors, we have a lot of physicians listening, what kind of role have they played in kind of helping you develop this? And I guess what has been some of the feedback you've received from physicians using the product?
Yeah, so let me answer your question as you asked it, but it's let me share sort of going off on a tangent a little bit, because that was one of the biggest crises we faced as a company. We launched in June of 2019, and we were cruising along quite nicely through the first quarter of 2020, and then the whole pandemic thing hit. And to your point, with physicians being the gatekeepers, you have to get their buy-in. The problem is that entails conventionally that you had to go do a demo, sort of a dog and pony show, if you will, get the physicians comfortable. But every hospital, every clinic was shut down in Q2 all of a sudden. And so for us, with a product that requires demonstrations to physicians, is like, now what do we do? Because the playbook, the conventional playbook, was thrown out the window. So we scrambled and we did the best we could, and we immediately began a digital outreach program. Really from not doing it to being pretty effective at it from beginning. That was a total of 30 days. And we were then able to do webinars as well as smaller group demos, everything done digitally vis-a-vis Zoom or similar video calls. Because part of, just in the same way that it was difficult to get in front of physicians, we also needed to get in front of insurance company adjusters and people who were going to potentially say yes or no for paying for the product. And so we couldn't access them either, because their offices were also closed, or they're now working remotely. They're no longer going to the work environment that they did. So we started doing webinars on our program. And in the course of 2020, I think we had 14,000 nurse case managers or adjusters attend our webinars. It was very, very cool, or great from our perspective. I think that the market was very kind to us. Word spread, where people started to talk to other adjusters. Hey, this company's putting on webinars, Harvard MedTech. you should actually attend this because what they're doing is very interesting. So what was, for all intents and purposes, almost a death blow with the pandemic coming, we were fortunately able to pivot, scramble, and figure out a way to get past that.
That's awesome. I mean, yeah, as you know, a lot of companies really struggled during that time. So it sounds like you weathered the storm very successfully, which, kudos to you and your team. That's amazing.
Yeah, and then the irony is that, as much as the pandemic was initially a really tough thing, it's now helped us tremendously. Because one of the things that I think we're very, very good at, and I would say best in class, is behavioral health interventions. And the pandemic really raised the awareness of behavioral health and how it's such a critical part in terms of people's ability to function. And so whereas behavioral health had a certain level of importance or recognition in 2017 or 2018, today it's much higher. The other thing that what the pandemic did is that as a result of the closures, everyone got a lot more comfortable with telehealth or remote patient treatment. And we're treating patients in their home, which is, I think, the ideal environment. But, in one of my previous companies, we came out with the first true ambulatory infusion device, which helped create the home infusion industry as we think of it today. And that lesson taught me that when we moved home care or home infusion into the patient's home, compliance went up, it's a better experience for the patients, the cost setting is lower. So we applied that same learning, if you will, from that experience to create a model here where we could do that. And the nice part about the pandemic, if you want to do it that way, is that everyone sort of recognized that, hey, this is actually a really a great way of treating patients.
That's awesome. One thing I'm wondering was, did you have any skepticism from, whether it be clinicians, healthcare systems or clinics? And I guess because this is, fairly disruptive what you're doing here. And so I'm curious, and kind of paving a new, like you said, kind of a new avenue for a lot of, a lot of these patients kind of got all lumped into one category. And now you're providing, more tailored solutions, and then also maybe people that just weren't as familiar with using VR in their practice. Maybe, any kind of pushback you got or skepticism and how you overcame that?
Great question, Maxwell. A ton of pushback. A lot of times I felt that people were looking at me like I had three heads. It's like, who is this crazy person? But on the other hand, as an entrepreneur, having been through this before, I'm used to that. I mean, that's sort of the initial thing. There's a big difference between bringing to market an evolutionary product versus a revolutionary product. If it's an evolutionary product, like let's say a better stent or a better wheelchair, the marketplace has already recognized that, okay, this is something of value. And then all you're saying is that, hey, you're already buying this, let me give you a different version of that. If you're bringing a revolutionary product to the marketplace, it's always very threatening and discombobulating to the existing systems and process that are in place. So we were talking about the infusion pump company. When I was bringing that to market, you heard all sorts of pushback. Oh, you can't do an infusion at home. What happens if the dog eats the infusion pump? I mean, it's all these ridiculous scenarios in terms of on stuff. And so it took a while for people to get comfortable. Likewise, in this thing, it was like, you went to certain cities in California, like San Francisco. Yeah, everyone knows VR. If you go to Mobile, Alabama, people have no idea what you're talking about. And so we were bringing a brand new modality to market, and we were really emphasizing the behavioral health aspect from the program. So it took a period of time, for people to get comfortable with it. And now we're getting much faster adoption from new physicians and new insurance companies. But the initial cycle, to your point, in 2019 and 2020, it was very missionary in nature, just getting people to wrap their head around, because if you think about how healthcare is delivered in our country, there's sort of basic concepts. You give people pills, you do surgeries, and so on. And what we were saying is that, look, those are all great modalities, but here's a more holistic way where we can achieve the same or better results without doing either one of those two things. And so for a lot of the folks in healthcare, it was in a way a threatening value proposition. Fortunately, we were able to articulate, and we got and the first group who really got behind it were physicians for different reasons. And and part of that is, as a company, bringing a new product to market. I've found that you have to be very strategic in your go-to-market strategy. I think that one of the most important issues for how successful a company will be is their go-to-market strategy, and it's oftentimes overlooked. People focus a lot on product or a lot of things, and I'm not saying those things are not important, but go-to-market is the most critical thing. And so part of it was we were very thoughtful in terms of seeking out physicians who we thought would be more progressive and who would be more open-minded, and getting them to be the early adopters. And today we have great KOLs. I mean, as an example, in one application of our product is it's prescribed to patients for pre and post pain management and behavioral health mitigation by spine surgeons as they're doing very significant surgery. And then we have all of the KOLs that you would want, Matt McGirt, Alex Vaccaro, Nick Theodore, who are all affiliated with the company and supportive, but that wasn't the case back in 2019. And so, we got here, but it was a long road, and it was very thoughtful and strategic in terms of how we would get here.
That's really interesting. Yeah, those are some big names. I had Dr. Vaccaro on my podcast previously, and he's definitely a very, very innovative guy. But yeah, no, that's I think, again, harping on this point, getting the end user to buy in and push for it and be a champion of it. I think that sounds like, something you did very, very successfully, which is pretty cool. I'm curious, from what have been some of the patient feedback? What would have been some of the, long-term benefits you've seen, both, in your studies, and then just even from, stories you hear from end users of it?
That is the most rewarding part of my job. Hearing from patients. And I do it systematically, where I will talk to 2 of our patients every month. And I want to hear directly from them. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? It's my fountain of truth. And so by hearing directly from the patients, that gives me a really good insight into what's being effective and what's not. But in addition to that, I read the notes, clinical notes from these weekly sessions. And so whether it's through those calls or whether it's through patient stuff, as well as a lot, it's amazing. We have patients who go out of their way to try to say, thank you so much for the impact your program has had on my life. And so it's extremely rewarding. And patients are very vocal about the impact that it's had for them, because a lot of them have been suffering for a significant period of time. And chronic pain is a very challenging issue. The other thing in terms of patient feedback is that you see it in terms of statistics, like they're returning back to work, or they're now socializing again, or they're going back to taking walks. And so, it's really whether it's hearing about it, reading about it, or drawing inferences based on the progress that patients are making. It's really exciting what we're doing. I do want to say, though, look, it's not a silver bullet that's going to work for every patient. It seems to be effective for about 70% of the patients we put on the program. Hopefully, over time, we will increase that effectiveness. But a big part of that is, in some cases, it's not going to help the patient. In some cases, perhaps the patient doesn't want to lean in, because we do have to have a patient cooperate and do the behavioral health therapy calls, do all the stuff, take ownership of it. But if we have a patient who wants to do that, it's effective in a very large percentage of the population.
That's really cool. Really, really, truly innovative. It's great. The other thing I wanted to ask about is, which you know all too well as a serial entrepreneur, is the fundraising aspect. And I guess, where are you guys at with, I guess, what kind of fundraising have you guys done? And, is that something you're continuing to do, or are you kind of holding still at this point on that front?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. to your point, I've been through the cycle. I mean, I've raised money from angel investors. I raised money as a part of a Series A from VCs. I've raised a Series B from growth equity investors. I've raised from private equity. I took a company public on NASDAQ. We had a very nice run. We raised money, obviously, in addition to the initial through secondaries. So, if you don't like raising money, you should not be an entrepreneur, because it's very much a part of the job description. On this particular company, I funded it myself until we were able to make sure that the dog was going to eat the dog food. Were patients going to benefit? Was insurance going to cover it? Would doctors prescribe? Just because I had the luxury of being able to do that. Then after that, we did our seed round, and our seed round has been it's been a collection of people who've known me for a very long period of time. Some of them were investors in previous companies, or they're all healthcare folks, whether they're entrepreneurs or executives, who understand the space. And we've also had a couple of smaller funds VC funds who've invested. We've been looking at doing a Series A, and we intend to do it, but we wanted to be able to do it on our own terms. And by that, it means finding the right partner, because it's not just money from anybody. Picking your partners from an investment perspective as an entrepreneur is really critical, because not all investors are the same. And it's really a partnership. It's, not to be overly dramatic, but it's kind of like getting married. I mean, you're tied at the hip with this institution or person for a long period of time. As well as, in terms of all the things as an entrepreneur, you want to get the right terms and all those sort of things. So we're looking at, we will go out and do a Series A. I mean, practically, we really be more the equivalent of a Series B or C at this point, but we will go out and raise our first institutional round probably later this year. And but we've had the luxury of where we have been able to finance the company internally and really off of the seed round to date. And what that has also allowed us to do is move very, very quickly. And as an entrepreneur, for me, having learned so many lessons over time, I can get the same value through an advisory board. And we do have a very extensive advisory board, both medical advisory board and industry advisory board. So in terms of help, I got that. In terms of the money, we were able to people were kind to us. They invested based on my track record and the value proposition of the company. And so we will go to an institutional round soon here, but we want to do it where we're thoughtful and we pick the right partner.
Very cool. Very cool. Something you touched on there I want to ask you about was, especially given your extensive experience, is advisory boards. And so, we have a lot of physicians that listen. I guess, what do you look for when you're putting together an advisory board? And I guess from the physician standpoint, I guess where, if they wanted to get involved, like beyond an advisory board or a strategic advisory or a startup, I guess what would be the best way for them to provide value if in that way?
Yeah, so do you mean that, Maxwell, in terms of generally or specific to Harvard MedTech?
I guess either or. I guess, and specifically in your company, what did you look, when you were building Harvard MedTech, what kind of advisors were you looking for? And I guess where have they provided the biggest value for you?
Yeah, so let's take our medical advisory board as an example. And what I was looking for is, first of all, the medical advisory board should have constituents that represent the totality of the ecosystem. So, for example, I have two of the members are the chief medical officer of large insurance companies. One is the chief medical officer of the Hartford, the other one the chief medical officer of Chesapeake Insurance, because we're in healthcare and we want to get their perspective. Likewise, we have, for example, Dr. Nick Theodore, who is head of neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins. Is also on the board. So you have an academic thought leader who is at the top of his profession and can give us a lot of insights there. We also have a physician who's an extraordinarily successful orthopedic surgeon who runs a practice in Las Vegas. And because some of our partners are going to be smaller practices, 1 to 20 physicians. And so I want to get their perspective in terms of, are we designing our programs to be great partners for them? So first of all, you want to have a lot of different perspectives, so you get a 360-degree advice. The second thing is that you really want to have people who have high EQ, where they can get along, where they can collaborate, where they're, don't have an insecurity complex, where every conversation is a IQ testosterone test, where they have to show you how smart they are. And so, it's really a combination of folks who are very smart, who have a diversity of opinions, but who have a very high IQ, so that they can collaborate with the other board members as well as with management. And it's a positive experience for everybody. For physicians who want to join advisory boards, I think I would say that pick and choose your spots, because you're going to commit time. The one thing in life that is absolutely limited is time. You can't buy more of it. You can't make more of it. And if you're doing something, you're not doing something else. So really make sure that you believe in the mission of the company, you believe in the product, you have good chemistry with a management team, that you're aligned with them in terms of what they're expecting the role to be. But at the end of the day, it's got to be something you're really interested in, right? It can't just be something where you're checking the box, because only if you really are interested in something are you going to have passion. Passion. I'm a big believer of passion in business. That's what drives people to do extraordinary things. That's what drives people to really stretch and reach. And so, from the physician's perspective, like I say, just be very thoughtful and choosy in terms of which assignments you take. Don't hesitate to ask a lot of the hard questions up front when you're talking to the entrepreneur.
I think that's excellent advice. I mean, all of us only have 24 hours in the day, no matter who you are. And I think for most physicians, unless they're, I guess, doing advising full time, this is going to go on top of their practice. And this is, I think you make a critical point. One, it's taking up time. And then two, you got to be very passionate about it. It's got to be something that you're invested in, not just, either financially, but also like something you want, like a change you want to see in the world. I think that's critical. And
Yes,
and I think you made another great point, like you said, you have Dr. Theodore from Johns Hopkins, big academic thought leader, but I think also bringing in, people from more of the community practice, because while it's important to have the academic thought leaders and there's a reason they're at these big institutions, many of the users out there, I think people may forget, are community hospital. I mean, most patients are treated either in, outpatient clinics or community hospitals, community ERs. And so I think that's a great point you made about getting their perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And for a lot of these smaller practices that are out there, they're facing a lot of financial pressures today. And so, they have to think about the business along with the clinical aspects of it. And unless we hear from them in terms of how our program is helping them be better or more optimal in whatever way that they want to be, we can't be good partners. And so just having that perspective allows me to be a better partner to the hundreds of practices who are a part of our network of partners on the prescribing side.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Shane, as we close out here, I just want to ask you, what are kind of your goals in the next year? So, you said you're thinking about obviously doing a big fundraise, but I guess aside from that, any other like big milestones you're hoping to hit in the next year or so?
I think that for us, we're past the phase 2 for the company in terms of there's no real existential threats at this point. The product is getting paid for, physicians like it, patients get benefits from it. So we're really now in a scaling mode. And so a lot of the stuff is doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes in terms of enterprise systems and clinical systems that can scale with us as we grow. So it's really at this point just execution. It's just continuing at our footprint, getting more practices on board, getting more insurers on board. It's just rinse and repeat, doing what we have been doing. So it's in a way it's easier than the last couple of years have been, but in another way, it's just as hard because execution. I mean, like I've taken companies in the past from $1 million or $2 million to 90 to 100 million in 3 years or 4 years in terms of a run rate. That is not an easy exercise, and you have to respect the process. And so, by all means, I'm fully aware of the journey and the challenges we have ahead of us. But what I'm saying is that it's all manageable, and so I don't lose sleep over will we survive as a company or will we exist? I think we're beyond that, but do we optimize the opportunity or not? That's what keeps me awake at night.
Awesome. Well, my last thing I ask every guest is, when you're not building medtech companies, what's your passions outside of work? How do you find that balance if there is one?
Yeah, I'm a big believer, more so than I was earlier in my life. I mean, in terms of sleeping at the office and 24. I mean, I've done all that stuff, and I don't necessarily think that makes you a better entrepreneur. I wish I'd got that wisdom a lot earlier, but but so in terms of, I mean, you have to work incredibly hard. I mean, I work 12 to 14 hour days, but I wake up every morning at 4 o'clock and I exercise. I go for a hike or for a walk for 2 hours. And for me, that's really important. And so my own personal health is another important issue for me. The other thing, in terms of as you get older in life, I want to continue to invest more in my personal relationships with friends, and just spending time with people who I like or care about, and really brings a lot of value to me. Then in terms of if I did have some spare time, which is a precious commodity, I guess the answer to that one would be painting, watercolor painting. It brings me calmness. And it's a way when I'm doing that, I'm not thinking about anything else. So it really helps with along with the hiking and walking, it really allows me to practice mindfulness.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's, exercise is obviously very important, and then having creative outlets too. That's awesome. Well, Shane, I really appreciate you taking time out of your very busy schedule to be with us. The last thing is, I guess, where can people find out more about Harvard MedTech and connect with you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, so I would encourage people to please go to our website, www, Harvard, like spelled like the university, medtech, medtech.com. And there on the website, there's a place that if you click for physicians, you can ask us to contact you. If someone wants to talk to me personally, they can say that just on the notes. But we would love to hear from physicians who are interested in working with us in our product, or just anyone who's interested in helping the HMT mission. So please go on our website, go and let us know, and we'll reach back out and connect with you.
Awesome. Well, Shane, you're working on some incredibly innovative and impactful technology. So I commend you and your colleagues. And again, thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Maxwell. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DaVinci Hour podcast, presented by DaVinci Academy. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your podcast platform of choice to catch the latest episodes. Please leave a comment or a review and share it with a friend. Lastly, you can find all of our podcasts, video courses, and books on our website, dviacademy.com. Thank you for listening.